Hello, my name is Mage and welcome to Black and White Thinking. If this is your first time here, I hope you enjoy or find useful the following musings. If you are returning, thanks for putting up with them, I really appreciate it. If this video scratches an itch for you, please consider subscribing to my channel, or you can help by inflicting my opinions on others by giving this video a little share. Thanks as always. Bisexual people have always been at the forefront of the fight for LGBT rights and acceptance. Bisexual people have always been pioneering organisers in the gay rights movement, having been active participants in the push for equal rights for as long as that fight has been happening. In today's video, I am going to be discussing two of those people. Two bisexual activists that pushed forward against homophobia, biphobia, and bigotry to have a lasting effect on LGBT people globally. The tales of two people who deserve to be remembered this Pride Month and every one after. Firstly, I want to tell the story briefly of Brenda Howard, the feisty, poly, kinky organiser of the first ever Pride March, the person that made Pride a week-long, then month-long celebration, and one of the queer activists to popularise the term Pride in the first place. And secondly, I would like to tell the story of another activist who helped popularise the word Pride. I would like to tell the story of the whirlwind known as Donnie the Punk, again only briefly. Donnie the Punk being a bisexual man that created the first ever gay student group to be recognised or chartered in the US. As well as being one of the fundamental organisers and participating in the first religious statement specifically addressing the rights of bisexual people by any religious body, again, in the history of the United States. These two people were awesome in so many ways, and this Pride Month I just wanted to share you their activism and inspiration, to talk about an influence that often goes unrecognised in LGBT discussions and recollections of our collective history, but an influence that still cannot be understated. Donnie and Brenda changed the world, and it wasn't exactly an easy world to change. So let's gather around and discuss the ins and outs of grassroots bisexual politics in New York in the 70s, and how two people always fought for the rights of gay men and lesbians, even when some gay men and lesbians chose not to fight for them in return. The next time someone asks you why LGBT pride marches exist, or why Gay Pride Month is in June, tell them, well, a bisexual woman named Brenda Howard thought it should be. Tom Limashelli. Brenda Howard, who would be described by friends as a firecracker, came into the world on December 24th, 1946, making her the most official of all boomers. She was born to Jewish parents in the Bronx and was raised in Long Island. In early adulthood, having graduated high school, Brenda quickly found herself inspired and becoming involved with the emerging late 60s, early 70s anti-war and feminist movements in New York. She would soon find herself as one of the chairs of the Gay Activist Alliance and a member of the Gay Liberation Front. After the raid, siege, and subsequent riot at the Stonewall Bar in New York in 1969, Brenda Howard took a leading role in organising a memorial a month after the fact. The annual memorial march that would come afterwards, and the concept of the Stonewall anniversary becoming Pride Week, which later would become Gay and Lesbian Pride Month in 1999, all came from Brenda. And yes, even the events organised with all LGBT plus rights in mind, and are logistically organised at every level by bi, trans and GNC people, are still often labelled simply gay and lesbian. After the chaos and catastrophe of Stonewall, the LGBT community, especially in New York, was traumatised and furious, and they came together to turn this anger into some action. Having been officially riled up, Brenda organised a memorial a month after the events at the bar, known as the Christopher Street Liberation Day March. When LGBT activists wanted to recreate the event on the first year anniversary of Stonewall, Brenda took the helm of organisation, putting together an event that would inspire millions of people to come together in the future to demand rights and space for LGBT people. At least, I guess at one point. I'm not going to pretend Pride is just a party and that we shouldn't work on reclaiming it a little bit. It's also important to stop kicking out bisexual people and ace people and trans people and people into kink, etc. from Pride. The only people that shouldn't be at Pride are cops. The bisexual mother of Pride, Brenda Howard, was actually poly and part of the BDSM community. That's definitely something to remember the next time you hear some idiot on the internet say that there shouldn't be any kink at Pride. A woman known for wearing a badge that said poly, switch, bi, I know what I want, did in fact put in what I can only imagine was an exhaustive amount of effort to actually organise the first Pride March. Brenda would lead a committee with her friends to organise and advertise the march from out of the Oscar Wilde Memorial Bookshop. Another bisexual deviant for you there. To quote Alyssa Goodman, who wrote a great article about this for them, linked below, the parade was scheduled for June 28, 1970. At first, only a relative few showed up for the parade's 2 p.m. start time, set to travel 51 blocks from Greenwich Village to Central Park. Police had to urge those who did show up to begin at 10 after 2, as if waiting to see if others would go first. People first trickled into the parade, but then they just showed up in droves, growing louder and louder, eventually forming a 1,000-strong mass of people 20 blocks long. It was, to say the least, a success. And Alyssa is right, it was a success. So much so that every major corporation or barely left of centre political figure now wants to slap a pride sticker on their chest and involve themselves in our culture and history without any effort. So much so that there is no part of the modern LGBT rights movement that hasn't interconnected with Pride festivities at some point. For all my complaints, for some queer people, Pride can be a formidable experience. It can be the first place one feels seen or accepted, or even the first place one can enjoy being amongst people who look and think like they do. Again, I don't personally feel this way. Being a bisexual teenager was hard, and I haven't been to Pride in years. I think Pride as a concept, that the march is really important, but that it could do with a swift reshuffle to focus more on its grassroots beginnings, and I guess that's part of the reason I've made this video. Brenda was also a nurse. She worked as a sex worker for a time, and she was incredibly vocal in the New York anti-war movement, and amongst her friends was always known to be the first to be arrested when protesting for the rights of marginalised people. She was described by her partner Larry Nelson after her death as being the type of person who, if you needed some kind of help organising some type of protest or something in social justice, all you had to do was call her and she'll just say when and where. In 1991, she was arrested while protesting with ACT UP against the firing of a lesbian staffer by the Atlanta State Attorney's Office. In 1993, she successfully campaigned to have the word bisexual added to the Gay and Lesbian March on Washington, alongside Lani Ka'ahumanu, another incredible bisexual activist who I will probably dedicate a future video to. These bisexual women who had always campaigned for equality, who had suffered their own losses in the face of that liberation, finally had their identity recognised in their work. Lani had organised the campaign and was the only bisexual speaker at the event. She wrote a great piece about the experience called How I Spent My 2-Week Vacation Being a Token Bisexual, which you can find linked below and I highly recommend. Returning to Brenda, the woman was incredible, and not only has she had a lasting impact on LGBT activism generally and the creation of Pride, she has had a lasting effect on bisexual people, her people, the cause that her friends around her said was closest to her heart. In 1987, Brenda co-founded the New York Area Bisexual Network, which still today offers outreach and support for bisexual plus people in one of the most densely populated places on the planet. Also, this is just a side note for me, but if you ever want to chuck your spare change at a queer charity this June, there are so many bi+ organisations out there that are struggling to find money from even supposedly LGBT friendly sources, and I will link them all below, once again, just in case. Every June, let us remember the mother of Pride, Brenda Howard, and do something in honour of the woman who dedicated her entire life to making sure things would be easier for us. The bisexual, big-hearted and big-mouthed beauty who worked tirelessly to provide a way forward for future queer generations globally. Bisexual identity led me to activism. Stephen Donaldson. Stephen Donaldson, born Robert Anthony Martin Jr., another boomer, on July 27, 1946 in Utica, New York, would come to be known as Donnie the Punk, a name he would pick up in prison. A young boy who would grow up to have a tumultuous life, Donnie would become the man responsible for creating the first chartered gay student union in the United States, inspiring a whole nation of students to found their own groups that still to this day carve space and campaign for queer students on campuses all across the United States. He created the first LGBT-led student movement only a few years after so-called homosexuality had been decriminalised. He would also at one point in his life become a Quaker, which would lead him to be part of organising the first ever statement by a religious body in the US that focused on bisexuality. The importance of these moments of small bravery and organisation, just like Brenda's, cannot be overstated in the grand scheme of LGBT activism over the last half-century. So, long story short, a young Donnie the Punk, after being outed by his mother to Columbia University, the college he was planning to attend, Donnie decided to contact the school himself and asked them if they would be happy letting in a man who liked other men, and if they would let him come register as a student, as an out student. The school essentially replied, saying, well, yes, but we want you to go to therapy and you're not allowed to sleep with any other students. This drew a young Robert Martin to Columbia even more. He had a chip on his shoulder and a fire in his belly. He was ready to carve space in a place where he knew he was not being welcomed. When he finally started attending Columbia, after having to change his name to avoid embarrassing his father, and being moved to a single dorm after his roommates complained that they were uncomfortable with a gay roommate, Donnie would begin a relationship with an older gay activist, Frank Kameny, and begin to grow his knowledge and passion for the homophile movement, as queer activism and culture was fondly known as at the time. Frank would come to introduce Donnie to other gay students at Columbia, and Donnie would suggest that they band together to form a gay student group, and so they did. Now, the real hook in the story of Donnie's fight for gay rights lies in the battle he fought to get his gay student group charter and recognition by Columbia, which obviously wouldn't be easy in the 60s. Donnie and his group would face backlash from a university that did not want to be represented by gay people, essentially. One of the issues Donnie faced is that in order to gain charter, Columbia wanted a list of members of the group. Donnie took issue, and rightly so, with the concept of handing over a list of gay students' names to faculty in the middle of the 60s. To settle this dispute, Donnie came up with the ingenious plan to register fellow student leaders as members, mostly straight allies, people already actively involved in student politics. He did this for looks only, handing Columbia a list of members that would never show up, and therefore gaining charter, but never having to compromise the anonymity or out any of his fellow queer students. Thus, the Student Homophile League, today known as Columbia's Queer Alliance, was born. Within the year, after some of the wildest press ever that involved a lot of gay backstabbing and university panic, students all over the country would begin contacting Donnie with the intention of beginning their own LGBT student groups. Not unlike Brenda, Donnie would have a fascinating life, but perhaps a little sad too. After falling in love with a woman and basically being excommunicated from the movement he had made, after coming out and identifying as bisexual after graduating Columbia, Donnie joined the Navy, where he was subsequently expelled again in 1972, and I quote, on the grounds of suspected homosexual involvement. Annoyed all of the hatred, Donnie fought back against his dismissal again, enlisting the help of 6 congressional representatives, the head of the American Psychiatric Association, the Chief Admiral of Naval Operations, and the ACLU, who would go on to provide him with an attorney. Donnie's dishonourable discharge would eventually become a general one, and then later, when Jimmy Carter decided it was time to honour queer vets, an honourable one. Even the Dean of Columbia would get involved, writing a letter to the Navy saying that Donnie was a man for whom he had great respect and one that never sought controversy. That last part is bull, but we appreciate the bi support. Donnie was controversy personified, unfortunately, and that's one of the things that kind of made him wonderful. After Donnie's very public fight against the Navy, hundreds of veterans would follow suit and another gay movement would be inspired by a bisexual man. After the Navy, Donnie became a Quaker, which is a denomination of Christianity, and he would be involved in the creation of the Ithaca Statement on Bisexuality, which is considered the first statement from a religious body on bisexuality in US history. After a meeting amongst bisexual and queer Quakers and their friends, Donnie was inspired by the statement and threw himself further into activism. Donny's life would be a series of ups and downs after that. The highs being such wonderful things as helping with bi pride and activism alongside people like Brenda in New York. One story he recalls in an essay is of him dating a woman who ran a local chapter of the Daughters of Bilitis, and how they would always cause a stir walking in as 2 out bisexual leaders into these so-called lesbian and gay groups. Imagining this whole scenario brings me so much joy. Donnie's downs would be severe though, and he would spend a lot of time in prison after being arrested for protesting. In prison, he would be assaulted, raped repeatedly, and by multiple offenders, being infected with HIV in the process. Life would be bad for a while for Donnie, and although he had given much of his youth to gay causes, very few people found a gay cause in him. After prison, and after he had understood how he had been victimised while he was there, and how he had victimised others because of his own pain, Donnie would return to bisexual activism in New York. Bisexual activism, but also a lot of work too now to advocate for victims of prison rape, becoming president of Stop Prisoner Rape Incorporated with a friend and testifying about the issue in front of the United States Supreme Court. Sadly, Donnie would die from AIDS complications in July 1996. Less than 10 years later, Brenda too would pass from colon cancer in June of 2005. Both of these bisexual activists lived lives that deserve far more time and energy than I could give them in this video, and both would eventually come to leave a lasting legacy on how the gay rights movement and the queer community has functioned for the last 50 years. I think it would truly be just a lie to say that student-led gay movements and pride marches inside and outside of the US haven't had a huge influence on the zeitgeist around queer rights. That legacy was created off the back of bisexual identity, bisexual struggle and bisexual joy, a legacy born of bisexual activism. Neither Brenda or Donnie had it easy, few of us ever really do, but they fought every battle that they came up against, and more importantly, they never left anyone else behind. They always stuck up for the underdog, even though they were the underdogs. And in my opinion, that's what Pride is about really, giving a shit about the underdog. And it's something we should all try to honour each June in the memory of Stephen Donaldson and Brenda Howard. Thank you so much for watching this video. I try to keep this one short. There is so much more you can learn about these two wonderful people, and I really recommend you do go look them up if you get a chance. Thank you for sticking to the end. I appreciate that too. I hope you found this educational or entertaining. If you did enjoy this video, again, please consider subscribing to this account so I continue to make content like this at a higher quality. Please consider sharing this video in queer spaces where you feel like some bi history might be needed. And please comment below even if you hated this whole thing. I crave the attention. This video can also be seen as a small intro into a podcasting project that I am working on at the moment that will focus on bisexual stories and history, so watch this space. Major out. Thanks again.